Two things. One, I'm not going to do the voice anymore. And two, Captain Marvel, played by Brie Larson, is a Kree warrior who doesn't remember her past and is fighting in a war between her people and a race of shape-shifting lizard-like people called the Skrulls. When she crash lands on Earth in 1995, she begins to have flashbacks to her previous life as Carol Danvers, an Air Force pilot. With help from Nick Fury, played once again by Samuel Jackson, she tries to uncover the secrets of her past while also trying to harness her incredibly powerful powers to end the war between the Kree and the Skrulls. Yay! Another controversial comic book movie that is controversial because, I don't know, nor do I care. I get that this movie supposedly has a lot of controversy behind it. Some people wanted it to succeed and others wanted it to fail. But you know what? When I go to the cinema, I go to the cinema to see a good movie. I don't go into a movie wanting it to be bad because that's just dumb and idiotic. I want to see a well-made movie with a good story that conveys a good message. Whether that's for the average audience member who wants to be entertained, girls who don't often get to see a female hero on screen, or better yet, both. Anyway, I'm not going to go into how or why this is a controversial movie because A, it's really confusing, and B, this is a movie review. Meaning, I'm here to share my thoughts on the movie and nothing more. So, let's get into it. Captain Marvel does have some really entertaining aspects to it, namely the dynamic between Brie Larson and Samuel Jackson. Both actors bounce off each other really well. Their arguments were creative and funny. Their chemistry was probably my favorite part of this movie because it was basically two friends, one being an inexperienced spy and the other being a freaking Super Saiyan, who argue with each other a lot but they get along like a house on fire. The second these two start interacting, this movie becomes a hell of a lot more fun because the middle chunk of this movie is basically a buddy cop movie mixed with elements of sci-fi, and that is awesome. I also really enjoyed the fish out of water aspect of this movie because that scenario led to some really funny scenes where Carol Danvers would be doing things that are normal to her but weird to basically everyone else, and they're just like, the hell is wrong with you? That stuff was funny as heck. Captain Marvel as a whole is a pretty funny movie. There are a lot of really clever one-liners and gags, most of which came from Goose the Cat, who was a huge surprise. I mean, yeah, I'm more of a dog person myself, and I was not expecting to enjoy the cat as much as I thought I was, but he was awesome. And super cute. Don't forget that part. The most groundbreaking thing about this movie is the incredible de-aging effects used on Samuel Jackson and Clark Gregg. This effect is so good that I genuinely forgot that I was watching Samuel Jackson running around with a CGI face. It is without a doubt some of the best CGI I have ever seen, purely because I didn't even notice it. It just blended into the background. The best CGI is the kind of CGI that tricks you into thinking that is actually real and not something that was created on a computer. That's what Captain Marvel does. With the de-aging stuff anyway. It's so seamless that it was kind of terrifying, but in a good way. Samuel Jackson in general was great in this movie. It was cool to see a younger, more inexperienced and cocky version of Nick Fury that we haven't really seen before, and it adds yet another layer of growth to his character and where he is now in the Marvel Cinematic Universe. While the first act of this movie is pretty clunky in terms of execution, there were aspects that I really enjoyed, like Carol Danvers' training with Jude Law, and this really well choreographed scene where Carol has these metal braces on her hands, and she's trying to punch walls and people really hard to shatter them. That was a badass scene. Possibly the most badass scene in the whole movie. I loved the score for this movie. It felt very different compared to most of the other Marvel movie scores, but with that said, it had an electronic hue to it, which was definitely inspired by Thor Ragnarok, I think, but it sounded cool, so whatever. To be honest, while I was entertained by this movie, this is definitely not one of Marvel's best. And unfortunately, one of the movie's biggest problems is the person it's named after. First of all, I do not think that Brie Larson is the problem here, because she does the best with what she's given to work with. Her performance felt very real and human, she was naturally funny, and she brought a very warm and likable essence to her performance that almost made me look past the actual problem. That being the writing. From the get-go, it felt like the writers didn't know who this character was, so they just decided to get a bunch of character traits, throw them in a blender, and hope for the best. One minute she's cocky and sarcastic, and the next she's stoic and kind of aloof. There was never a point where those characteristics formed to create one character, so it ended up making her growth as a character inconsistent. However, while Brie Larson does do a good job performance-wise, she definitely doesn't have the Marvel movie charisma just yet. Many of the other actors in this universe have a lot of energy and a certain glow to their performance that gives this larger-than-life vibe to them. And while Brie Larson definitely has the energy, I don't think she has the glow just yet. That said, I think that she will find her groove in later movies like Endgame or whatever else she's going to be in next, but she definitely worked best when she was with someone who was funny and charismatic to bounce off, e.g. Nick Fury. Captain Marvel is unfortunately a really bland movie visually. While most of the effects outside of the de-aging stuff were pretty good in terms of design and just generally how well they were rendered, visually there is a severe lack of style. For example, you look at the visceral, intense style that the Russo brothers brought to the second two Captain America movies, or what James Gunn did with the Guardians of the Galaxy movies. You can tell who made which movie. You don't have to read the credits because the style of filmmaking pretty much tells you everything. Here, everything looks really dark, murky, and bland, making for a very visually uninteresting movie. The lack of color in a lot of scenes just made this movie look so boring. I get that a movie doesn't have to be colorful to be visually intriguing, but in this movie, all the environments and sets have this grey-brownish color that did nothing but basically suck the life out of shots that would have looked beautiful in another color palette, but in this one, ugh. The action was also pretty disappointing. It wasn't terrible, but the choreography, save for that one scene with the braces, just felt lackluster and lazy. The editing and the camera work didn't do it much favor either, as some of the time I couldn't even tell what the flip was going on. There was one scene in a black and white room where there were occasional close-ups so you could see who's who, but the scene cut between shots so rapidly that I couldn't even tell what happened. Aside from that action sequence with the braces and a really exciting chase sequence that takes place on a train, there is not a single memorable fight sequence. Although, the movie does prioritize the story more than anything else. It's not an action-heavy movie. It understands that the story and characters are the most important thing here. The story as a whole is pretty good. It's a pretty well-paced movie that basically passes by without you even noticing. The worst part about the weaker Marvel movies is that they really overstay their welcome by pacing themselves as slowly as possible so they can hit that 2-hour mark when they really don't need to be. In Captain Marvel, I was never bored when watching it. It moved at a fast enough pace that kept me entertained for pretty much most of its runtime. Act 1, like I said, is clunky in execution, but as soon as Carol Danvers makes it to Earth, the movie gets really fun. The movie also changes something from the comics that I'm guessing a lot of people will hate, but it worked for me because it was a really cool and creative way to take the story and a very interesting way of portraying a prominent element of the comics that basically flipped the mythology on its head. It is faithful to the mythology of Captain Marvel and the Kree-Skrull War, although I do appreciate the changes they made to the mythology because it made the movie feel less predictable. The flashback scenes where we got to find out more about Carol Danvers' past were surprisingly effective. The editing and cinematography did enhance those scenes in the sense that they felt really cerebral, and the way that Carol's past is uncovered was pretty weird, but in a good way. It's a little hard to explain, but that cerebral and trippy approach made the flashback scenes more engaging, and while they were heavily reliant on cinematography, the flashback scenes as well as the back and forth between Carol and Nick Fury are where Brie Larson is at her best. Captain Marvel does have some really entertaining side characters, most notably Ben Mendelsohn, who is suitably over the top and pretty funny. Admittedly, I was kind of expecting him to do his usual shtick when it comes to villains, which is basically what he did in Ready Player One, but in this movie, it genuinely felt like there were more layers and substance to his performance this time, and his character ended up being one of the most entertaining parts of this movie. The Skrulls themselves don't look as bad as they did in that first teaser image we got. I don't know if it's because they changed some stuff up or if it's because I just got used to it, but point is, they look great, and I freaking love that shape-shifting effect. That was awesome. They do take the Skrulls in a very different direction to what I thought they were going to do with them, but it really worked for me. I'd say it's one of the most interesting aspects of the movie. Lashana Lynch, who has a really powerful monologue in this movie, is amazing. In fact, performance-wise, she was definitely one of the better parts of this movie. There are points where I thought her relationship with Carol Danvers felt a little forced, but for the most part, I liked her. Jude Law is great, but the other members of the Kree Squad are meh. Aside from seeing Korath from Guardians of the Galaxy again, they were pretty forgettable. Captain Marvel is a movie I like way more than I dislike, but I can't say I wasn't disappointed by it. Yes, it has some really entertaining side characters, it's really funny, the story isn't bad, and the de-aging effect is awesome, but the problems this movie has really stop it from being truly spectacular. Considering this movie is supposed to be the introduction to the new main character of the MCU as a whole, I was expecting a heck of a lot more. Heck, this movie should have been spectacular, but it was pretty far from that. It was a movie that didn't really make me feel much, and a lot of that is down to how Carol Danvers is written as a character. It's kind of like what happened with Solo: A Star Wars Story, where I thought that Han was going to be the worst part in a great movie, but then ended up being the best part of a meh movie. Only this time I thought Captain Marvel was going to be the best part of her own movie, but ended up being the worst part in a pretty good movie. Captain Marvel gets a 7 out of 10. So those are my thoughts on Captain Marvel. I do hope you enjoyed this video, guys. Please don't forget to like, subscribe, follow me on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter, and I will indeed see you guys in the next one. But before I go, I would just like to ask you guys, what did you think of Captain Marvel? Did you think it was good? Did you think it was bad? Did you think it was somewhere in the middle? Please don't forget to leave your thoughts down in the comments below, and once again, I'll see you in the next one. Sayonara! Oh, and don't forget to check out my last 2 videos. I mean, if you want to. Not forcing you. Anyway, bye!